Montana, in November carried a particular kind of sorrow. The mountains in the distance faded into a mist as cold as silence. Overhead, the sky had long lost its blue. A thick blanket of gray clouds stretched endlessly, as if mourning in its own quiet way, ready to shroud the town beneath its weight. St. Augustine's Church stood on a low hill overlooking a field of yellowed grass, a place often chosen for military funerals. That morning, it wasn't a house of prayer. It became a place of parting. Quiet, heavy. Wind slipped through the cracks of old wooden doors, whispering faintly like someone crying from deep within, but unable to make a sound. Colored glass windows cast dim lights onto the stone floor, painting shifting stains of purple, crimson, and gold that floated like nameless souls at the edge of farewell. At the center of the chapel, a dark mahogany casket rested atop a raised platform. The national flag was draped across it, folded with such chilling perfection that it became the final emblem of honor and sacrifice. In front of the casket, 2 soldiers stood guard, unmoving, hands on their rifles, eyes sharp, but shoulders slightly lowered, as if this were the last rite for one of their own. Logan Hale, Special Ops Captain once deployed to the Afghanistan border, had not returned the way he left. There was no laughter, no embrace, only a casket heavier than 1,000 goodbyes. The death notice had been brutally brief. Major Logan Hale, killed in the line of duty, classified operation, no further information. And then came the plane carrying the casket, cold handshakes, avoidant eyes, a silence louder than grief. Lining the wooden pews were those who had once fought beside Logan, all in full dress uniform, jackets pressed crisp, polished epaulets gleaming, leather shoes reflecting the ceiling lights. But beneath the flawless exterior were shattered hearts. These men had survived war zones. But this morning, they were learning to survive something even harder than death itself. Helplessness. No one spoke. No one cried. Yet in every pair of eyes was a sorrow so tightly held it could crush the soul, as if one single tear would cause the whole room to collapse. In the first row sat Harper Hale, Logan's sister, alone. She wore a plain black dress. Her bare shoulders trembled beneath a thin shawl. Her brown hair was neatly pinned at the nape of her neck, revealing a pale face and sunken eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. Her hands gripped an old silk handkerchief, the last gift Logan had given her before his final deployment. Harper no longer cried. She had run out of tears the moment the news arrived. The moment she received the folded flag from the officer's hand, she knew she had lost him, truly and forever. The entire church felt weighed down by unspoken memories. Everyone there carried a piece of Logan's story. The model commander, the teammate who never backed down, the older brother who once held an umbrella over his sister in the freezing rain even as his fingers went numb. Then it came, a sound from the far end of the church. Click, click. The faint tapping of claws on the old stone floor echoed under the vaulted arches, slicing through the silence like a hairline fracture in glass. The entire room seemed to pause, frozen in a breathless beat. From the back doorway, where light filtered dimly through stained glass, a figure appeared. Asher. The gray-coated canine German shepherd stepped in silently. His body was strong, broad-chested, but each breath was short and shallow, as if this air belonged to a world he no longer recognized. The fur around his neck and shoulders bristled slightly, not from aggression, but as an unconscious echo of instinct. Beneath that fur was a body shaped by duty, hardened but worn. A long scar ran down his left leg, a remnant of last year's ambush, the one where Asher threw himself in front of a bullet meant for Logan. The wound had healed. But what lay beneath, memory, instinct, loyalty, had never stopped aching. Asher's eyes, a dark amber brown, stared ahead, fixed and unmoving. As if nothing else existed, no people, no sound, just one focus that consumed his entire being, the flag-covered casket. He stood still for a few seconds, ears perked, nose drawing in the heavy air, shoulders lowered more than usual. His entire frame, once trained to charge into gunfire, now radiated something else entirely: confusion, pain, and the kind of sorrow that knows no words. A young officer held his leash. The man's hand gripped the leather tightly, unease in his eyes as he felt the weight of the room pressing toward him. Not for him, but for the creature at his side. Asher didn't care. He stepped forward. One pace, then another. The sound of claws striking stone, tap, 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 echoed with heartbreaking clarity. He didn't run. He advanced like a soldier returning from a place beyond life. Slow, deliberate. Each step pulled tighter at Harper's chest. She turned her head and locked eyes with Asher, and in those eyes, she did not see a dog. She saw a person, a teammate, a brother, a soul that had lost something too vital to name, struggling to find its way back to what could never be again. Halfway down the aisle, Asher stopped. He raised his head, his gaze locked on the flag. His body quivered slightly, his mouth opened as if trying to call out. No sound came. But the whole church heard it, heard the silent scream of one who had lost their entire world and was never told why. The young officer gave the leash a gentle tug. Asher did not turn back. He didn't flinch. A slight tug. Once. Then again. And suddenly, with a sharp pull, the leash slipped from the officer's hand and flew behind him. Chairs shifted. A few soldiers stood abruptly. One of them made a move forward. But the chaplain, the elderly pastor near the altar, raised his hand to stop them. His voice was deep, steady, echoing across the nave. "Let him go." Asher surged forward. No growl, no ferocity, but determination, precision, like a bullet finally released from a chamber no one had dared to fire. He didn't run fast, but something in his stride made hearts tighten. An older soldier murmured under his breath, "He knows exactly where he's going." Harper didn't blink. Her lips trembled. A tear slid down her cheek, not from pain, but from understanding. Logan was still here, in that figure moving straight toward where he now lay. Asher pressed his legs once more, and then, without waiting for a command, without anyone stopping him, he leapt onto the casket. The sound of claws landing gently yet distinctly on the polished mahogany rang out, shifting the flag just slightly, creating a subtle fold. A breath out of rhythm in a room already suffocating with emotion. A few gasped. Some swore they saw the Logan movie. But it was only Asher. He stood still on top of the casket, staring down at the body that had once meant everything to him. The thick, dark fur along his spine bristled. Not out of fear, but because he was feeling. The scent of wood, the fabric, the faint trace of sweat clinging to the collar of the uniform. All still there. But the man was gone. Asher lowered his head. Then slowly, without drama, without hesitation, he curled up. As if it was instinct, as if this was simply what he had always done. Each time Logan fell asleep in a bunker, at a checkpoint, in the middle of the forest or a desolate desert, Asher would find him, lay beside him, and rest his head on his chest, guarding every dream. This time was no different. Only now, Logan no longer breathed. Asher's head came to rest on Logan's left chest, the place where a heart had once beat strong through hundreds of patrol hours, clenched during gunfire, and swelled with pride each time someone called out, "Captain Hale!" A low whimper came from Asher. Not a howl, not a growl, but a husky, broken sound lodged in his throat, like a soul trying to call out to the one who left without saying goodbye. The whimper hung in the silence, like a question no one had ever dared to answer. "Why didn't you come back? Why are you alone? You promised." The entire church froze at that moment. No chairs moved, no sighs were heard. Even the sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows seemed to pause and pull back, leaving room for the most sacred second of the ceremony, the moment when the living realized, with unbearable clarity, that they had truly lost the one they loved. A young officer quietly removed his cap. An elderly mother bowed her head, hands trembling as they clasped together. A new recruit wept silently, shoulders shaking with each breath. The chaplain clutched his Bible so tightly his knuckles turned white. Harper bent forward, hand covering her mouth, fighting back the sob that rose inside. She wasn't crying for the loss anymore. She was crying because she had just witnessed the purest form of love in her life, and it came from a creature that never needed words. And then, as if something inside had shifted, Asher slowly extended a paw. His left front leg, the one bearing the scar from last year's ambush, lifted gently, steady. He placed it on the edge of the casket. A simple movement. Bare, unadorned. But the entire church broke in silence. Because anyone who had ever worn a uniform understood. It was a vow, a ritual, the final signal from a soldier to his commander. "I am here. I never left you." No words were needed. No one dared speak. And then, from the back pew, where the old soldiers sat with spines still straight and memories intact, one of them bowed his head slightly and whispered in a voice raspy and tight, "At ease, soldier." The words weren't entirely for Logan. And maybe not entirely for Asher either. Maybe the words were for both of them, or for everyone who had ever fought, ever lost, ever survived with wounds no one else could see. The moment those words echoed through the chapel, Asher exhaled. A long, deep breath, slow and deliberate, as if letting go of a burden he had carried for far too long. He tucked his paw back in, lowered his head, and closed his eyes. Not to sleep, not to surrender, only because he had received his final order. And the entire church melted into tears, because after that moment, no one could hold anything in anymore. Asher remained there, motionless, as if part of the casket itself. His large body covered the upper half of Logan's, but it did not feel out of place or intrusive. On the contrary, there was something profoundly right about it. So right that no one dared interfere. As if this was the goodbye a soldier truly deserved. Harper sat silently in the front pew. Her hand clenched the black handkerchief, her palm damp with cold sweat. She couldn't take her eyes off Asher. But what unsettled her was not just the unwavering loyalty. It was his eyes. There was something in them she had never seen before. Not just sadness, not simply grief. Something deeper. Darker. As if the dog knew something no one else did. And he was trying to say it. Asher opened his eyes. Gently. Slowly. His gaze no longer rested on Logan, but seemed to go beyond him. As if something behind the casket, behind the sorrow, beyond even death itself, had caught his attention. Harper felt a chill run through her body. She followed Asher's gaze, but saw nothing. Just stained glass, a few faint beams of light, and a weather-worn statue of the Virgin Mary. But Asher kept staring, without blinking. His body trembled, his nose twitched, his ears flicked slightly. every part of him frozen in heightened tension. Harper gripped the edge of the pew. She couldn't take her eyes off the creature silently carrying the weight of an entire funeral's grief. She wasn't superstitious. She believed in science, logic, and reason. But now, seated in an old church, in front of her brother's coffin, beside a dog who couldn't speak but seemed to understand more than anyone else, she began to feel that something was wrong. As if Logan's death had not truly found its closure. She felt a small, barely visible crack in the story the military had told. A detail that didn't fit. Something Logan had not yet been able to say. And perhaps the only one still carrying what he couldn't pass on was Asher. And then Asher turned his head and locked eyes with Harper. Only for a second, but it was enough to send a shiver through her. There was something in that look, a signal, a memory, a silent cry for help. And in Harper's chest, something small shifted, a question that had no shape yet, a suspicion without evidence. But she knew, with chilling clarity. This wasn't over. After the funeral, Montana returned to its usual stillness, but it was no longer the comforting stillness of a quiet mountain town. It was something heavier, a silence that stretched out endlessly, with no place to land. The maple tree behind the church had shed nearly all its leaves. Its bare branches trembled in the wind, scratching tiny scars across the ashen sky. The fields beyond, once green and full in summer, now lay barren, cracked under a morning mist thick as sorrow. The cemetery gate remained half open, as if never fully closed after Logan's burial. Along the rows of stone markers, the white lilies laid that day had begun to wilt, petals drooping, droplets still clinging to their stems like tears left unwept. The signs were taken down, the folding chairs packed away, the canopies were removed. But no one could sweep away the cold that absence leaves behind. The soldiers had returned to base. The military trucks were gone. Harper left the church the next evening, the triangular folded flag in her arms. But her heart felt left somewhere on the stone steps beneath the altar. She couldn't remember what she had said on the way out, or if she looked back. She only knew that something remained unfinished. For 3 days after the funeral, there was no rain, but no sun either. The air hung still, not falling, not dispersing. Everything waited, as if the land itself was holding its breath, expecting someone to return. And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, the call came. Harper was making coffee in her parents' long unused kitchen when the phone rang. On the other end, a young man's voice, urgent and subdued. "We're very sorry. Asher is missing." Missing? Harper froze in the middle of the kitchen. "We've checked the kennel thoroughly. No signs of forced entry. No one saw anything. The collar is still intact. We think he slipped away during the night." Harper didn't respond. She put down her coffee mug, her eyes fixed on the space beyond the window. The wind stirred the curtain. It carried the scent of dry grass, and something older, something aching, a sense of loss that had not yet hit bottom. Less than a day later, the internet was flooded with photos. A gray-coated K9 lay curled at the base of a solitary grave. His head rested on the cold earth, his eyes half open, as if still on watch. The gravestone bore words etched deep into memory: Logan Hale, Commander. Brother. He never left a man behind. The picture had been taken at dawn, fog still thick, light barely there. Asher appeared blurry, almost fading into the loss he could not understand. Within hours, the hashtag number #BringAsherHome spread across social media. posts cut deep. No one ordered him, but he returned. The most loyal soldier has no words, but he's speaking for all of us. Let Asher stay where his heart belongs. Harper didn't join the conversations, but when she saw the photo, silence was no longer an option. That evening, she drove to the cemetery. Cold wind and dust blurred the windshield. The same iron gate stood ajar, just like it had on the day of the funeral. But this time she walked through alone. No formation, no anthem, only silent graves. And Asher still lying there. She didn't need to call his name. No signal was needed. He lifted his head from afar and looked straight at her. Harper approached and knelt beside him. "Asher," she whispered, her voice thick and hoarse. He didn't answer with a sound, just rested his head gently on her knee. A simple touch, unadorned, but enough to start breaking apart the loneliness that had been closing in around her. She didn't know how long they sat like that. Only when she stood and opened the car door, Asher followed. No leash, no hesitation. They left the cemetery together in silence, no send-off, no ceremony. But the way Asher looked through the rear window, as if leaving something behind, left Harper with a tightness in her chest she could not explain. She brought Asher back to Logan's old house, the one where the two siblings had grown up. A wooden cabin nestled quietly behind a line of aging pines, thick with dust from years untouched. When she opened the door, the scent of old wood, damp paper, and time itself rushed out, carrying memories that had never quite faded. Asher stepped in without hesitation, but also without curiosity. He made one slow circle, then stopped in the middle of the living room, the spot where Logan used to sit and read every afternoon, and stood still, as if waiting for someone to emerge from memory. Harper did not interrupt. She simply placed a small rug beside the staircase so he would have a place to rest. But that night, Asher did not sleep there. He lay curled by the front door, as if still standing guard, as if Logan had not yet come home. The next day, Harper opened Logan's closet. As soon as the door creaked open, Asher, resting in the corner of the room, sprang up. His ears stood erect, eyes wide, staring at the empty space inside the closet as though someone invisible had just stepped out. Then he backed away, silent, shrinking into himself, afraid of something that could not be named. Harper didn't reach for him, but that night she took one of Logan's old shirts and placed it gently on the floor near Asher. No commands, no pleading, just a gesture. The next morning she found him curled up on it, his head resting on the collar, where the familiar fold still pressed against the fabric. At first, the connection between them was fragile, tentative, like thin ice stretched across a silent lake. There were no joyful embraces, no affectionate calls, none of the usual warmth of a typical dog and human bond. They lived under the same roof, but like strangers, or more accurately, like two souls who had lost something too vast to know how to reach for each other again. Harper didn't try to pet Asher. She didn't push affection, didn't impose closeness. She had seen too many people treat dogs like blankets laid over loneliness, thinking closeness could be commanded with food and routine. But she knew Asher didn't need pity. He needed time. She left space in every room for him to enter or not, placed food and water quietly, then withdrew, like a guest in what used to be her own home. Asher was no different. He didn't seek her out like an owner, didn't demand, didn't follow to please or gain attention. He was present, but distant. He followed, but not closely. He watched, but never interfered, as if waiting for something that had no name. By day, he lay behind the sofa, eyes half shut, but ears perked with every step she took. When she cooked, he never entered the kitchen. He sat quietly at the threshold, watching, as if protecting her from unseen dangers only a soldier would sense. Harper reread Logan's old journals, the fragments of notes he had left behind. When she reached pages smudged with sweat and hurried handwriting, Asher would quietly lift his head, move closer, not to look, but to share the moment beside her. And day by day, something began to shift, slowly, but steadily. Asher began lying at her feet while she worked. Silent, like a living shadow. Never in the way, never needy, but warm and solid. He followed her into the garden. Didn't play, didn't run. Just found a spot near the gate, sat tall, and kept watch over the trail that led beyond, as if still on patrol, just like back at the base along the border. One night, Harper dreamt of Logan. A broken dream, no clear image, just a voice calling again and again in the dark. "Harper, don't forget. Don't let it be buried." She woke with a start, heart pounding. Her shirt clung damp to her back. She turned on the light. Asher was lying beside the bed, eyes open, unblinking. He hadn't scratched the door, hadn't barked. He just lay there, as if he had already known something was coming. A woman curled in fear from a nightmare, a dog guarding a grief that felt like a shape needing to be contained. Harper watched him for a long time. Then she lay back down and fell asleep again. For the first time, she didn't dream. She told no one. Didn't share it with friends. Not because she didn't want to, but because how could she explain something she wasn't sure was real? How could she say she believed the dog was trying to tell a story that her brother hadn't finished writing? At first, those signs were quiet, too small to name, but too persistent to ignore. Then they began to appear everywhere. One gray morning, Harper stepped into Logan's room, still untouched since the funeral. Light filtered through the thin curtains, revealing floating dust like a mist suspended mid-air. She knelt beside the low cabinet near the bed, where Logan used to store personal files. When she opened the door and reached for a military folder wrapped in plastic, Asher, who had been lying in the hallway, instantly rose. He didn't run in, didn't bark. He froze, tense like a drawn wire. Harper turned her head. He was staring at the folder in her hand. Those dark brown eyes catching the faint light, held not worry, but warning. Silent, but sharp as a blade. He stepped forward, slowly, then placed himself between her and the cabinet. No growling, no aggression. But his presence was unmistakable, like a door slamming shut. She froze. Her hand was resting on a folder labeled Operation Sand Ridge, Classified. Beneath it, a name faded with time. Logan Hale. "It's okay," Harper whispered. "I just want to know what he really died for." Asher tilted his head, ears still alert, his breathing shallow and quick. Then he lowered his head and placed one paw gently on the folder in her hands. That light touch made Harper shiver. Not from fear, but because something real was holding her back, not instinctively, but as if Logan himself, through Asher, was delivering a final command. "Not yet. Don't rush." That evening, she took out Logan's old radio, the receiver he had carried throughout many deployments. The metal had dulled, but the tuning knobs still worked. As the first frequency clicked into place, a short burst of military code buzzed through the speaker. Asher, who had been lying 2 rooms away, appeared silently in the doorway. No noise, no warning, just there, like a ghost. He stood without entering, without looking at her. His eyes locked on the radio, his body tensed, His chest rose and fell like someone reliving a sound from the past, and it hurt too much to bear. She turned the dial. A second frequency came through. Baker 1, report coordinates. Approach time, 0645. Prepare. Just another order. Routine. But Asher whimpered, not loudly, not clearly, but with a weight, like a snapped string buried in his throat. He stepped back, lowered his head, then turned away. Walked into the next room and lay down facing the wall. He was hiding, not from her, but from a memory buried too deep. Harper didn't call him back. She just sat there, staring at the radio buzzing with static, and for the first time felt herself growing unsteady in the face of a truth still untold. A few days later, she found the key to Logan's wooden footlocker, the one he had carried from base to base, always locked. It had been stored in the utility room at the end of the hall, covered in dust and silence, like a memory left behind. As she placed the key into the lock, Harper hesitated. As if opening the trunk would not only reveal old equipment, but open a doorway into a part of Logan's mind he had carried through every mission, and never spoken of again. The latch clicked, the hinges creaked. Inside was a space meticulously arranged, a tactical knife, a dark leather-bound notebook worn soft by time, a GPS tracker, and a bundle of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Harper knelt before the trunk, letting her hands pass over each object as though touching her brother's skin. Every item bore his mark. The knife, honed and ready. The notebook, scribbled in his unmistakable slanted print. The GPS, still powered on a dim battery but steady within its case. All of it lay there, still and silent, like a tiny shrine buried beneath a storm to keep something sacred from being swept away. She picked up the oilcloth bundle and felt something inside, not heavy in weight, but in meaning. Later, in the fading light of another day, Harper took Asher out to the back of the property. The ground was rough and cold. Dead pine needles layered the forest floor. Without a word, Asher began to dig. Soil flew in small, steady bursts. Each claw strike was precise, unhesitating, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for, how deep it was, and how long it had been buried. Harper knelt beside him. She didn't speak, didn't stop him, didn't give any command. She just placed her hand on the earth and joined him, pulling back time one layer at a time. Her breathing slowed. The cold air filled her lungs, but her heart beat faster with each scratch of Asher's paws. After several minutes, his claws struck something solid. They both stopped. Harper reached forward, brushed away the loose soil, and felt the edge of cold metal. She dug deeper with her hands until the shape emerged. A small tin box, dull silver, edges rusted but the clasp on the lid still intact. She lifted it, lighter than she had imagined. But it was not empty. It felt as though she was holding the final piece of Logan's soul. Even the roots clinging to the base of the box seemed to resist, as if the earth itself wanted to keep this secret buried. Harper opened the lid. Inside, there were 3 items. A stack of yellowed papers, edges slightly singed, covered in black-inked handwriting, most of it diagrams, military symbols, and rushed notes in red pen. Order altered, no confirmation. Who authorized this mission? Zrenia, no recording permitted. An unsent letter, marked clearly in red, to be sent to Harper, only if something happens. And a small memory card, the kind used in handheld voice recorders. Harper said nothing for several minutes. She sank down to the ground, back against a tree, hands trembling as she held the letter. Asher lay beside her, head resting on her leg, eyes open, as if watching every reaction, or reliving something himself. The letter was written in Logan's hand, this time neater, more deliberate, as if composed during a quiet night after a long battle with his own thoughts. Harper, if you're reading this, I may already be gone. There are things I couldn't say, not within the unit, not in reports, and definitely not to outsiders. Someone tried to push our team into an op with no clear origin, no logistical contact, no support. But the orders came anyway, and every response we sent was cut off midway. I began to notice strange behavior in the team, like they were being watched, like something was pulling strings. I started recording, secretly. The memory card you found, that's the last copy I kept. Don't give it to anyone, not even someone in uniform. Find someone you can trust. Clark knows part of it. Mason Clark. If you can find him, everything will start to make sense. I trust you. And Asher, if he's with you, then you're not alone. Logan. Harper pressed the letter to her chest. Her vision blurred, not from the wind. Asher let out a low whine, soft but carrying a lifetime of memory. The next morning, Harper packed the essentials. The letter, the memory card, Logan's notes, and the address of Mason Clark, a former special operative who had served beside Logan during several campaigns in the Middle East. She knew one thing for certain. Some answers could only come from someone who had stood next to Logan in the line of fire. Mason's cabin was nearly 80 miles from town, perched on the edge of a pine-covered hill, cold and isolated like the life he had chosen after discharge. Harper arrived just past noon. She knocked 3 times. No one answered. But Asher, silent the entire drive, suddenly rose, ears perked, nose twitching. Then, without waiting, he walked to the front door, lay down facing the woods, and waited. A few minutes later, the wooden door creaked open. A man in his early 40s stood there, salt and pepper hair, broad shoulders slightly slumped, eyes carrying the weight of deserts and silence. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on Asher for a long time. Harper Hale, she introduced herself. Logan's sister. Mason didn't reply, just gave a faint nod, a muscle memory from military life, then stepped aside to let her in. The cabin was quiet, but full of echoes from the past. Maps pinned across the walls, notebooks, a shortwave radio, and faded black and white photographs. In one framed picture, Harper spotted Logan, standing beside Mason, both in camo gear, eyes fixed on a shared horizon. Mason poured coffee and set it on the wooden table. Harper didn't drink. She pulled the letter from her coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. He left this for me, with your name in it. Mason read it in silence. His eyes did not blink when he reached the line. Clark knows part of it. His lips tightened. His hand trembled slightly against the paper. You shouldn't have come here, he said quietly. Some things are better buried with the dead. And what about the things killed by silence? Harper replied, her gaze steady. I'm not here for vengeance. I just want to know why my brother had to die. And if you know, don't let me walk this path alone. Mason didn't respond right away, but in that silence, Asher stepped forward. He sat beside Mason. No growling, no hesitation. Just calmly settled next to the old soldier, as if saying, I remember you. Mason looked down. Something in his expression softened. He crouched and placed a hand gently on Asher's head. Asher didn't flinch. He was there with Logan, wasn't he? Mason asked. Harper nodded. Through the whole deployment. He was the last to see my brother alive. Mason closed his eyes in a deep breath, then rose and disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he carried an old bundle wrapped in twine and laid it on the table. Inside were maps, notes, and a faded stack of photos, mission coordinates, rerouted signals, unauthorized orders not traced through regular command. "I don't have proof," Mason said, "but Logan did. If he trusted you, then I trust you too. But we don't have much time. What he uncovered wasn't small, and if they've kept it quiet this long, then none of us are safe." Harper looked at Mason, then at Asher. The dog sat between them, head tilted slightly, ears lifted, like a soldier awaiting his next command. And for the first time, Harper saw it clearly. The team was assembled. The next day, they began. Mason laid out every map, note, and document he had kept hidden. Harper unfolded the folder, Logan's dispatch orders, and the campaign journal he had left behind. At first, the materials seemed unrelated, but placed side by side, the contradictions became undeniable. Certain deployment points in the official orders did not match the actual positions Logan's unit had reached. Entire regions were left blank in the reports, even though satellite data showed covert military activity had taken place there. Some of the maps had been manually altered in pencil, with red markings over risk zones that never appeared in the operational plans. Harper furrowed her brow, scanning each timestamp in Logan's journal. In the final days, he stopped writing about the mission itself, but he recorded the weather and the behavior of some in his unit, as if he was observing them. Mason nodded, his eyes darkening. "I used to receive orders from him, but I never spoke to him directly. Logan did. And after that day, he changed. He became quieter, more guarded." Asher stood by the window, silently watching. Each time they mentioned that name, he let out a faint whimper. Harper started to notice. Asher wasn't reacting to the sound, but to the emotion, as if he could feel the energy of memory, as if each time that name was spoken, a part of Logan's memory inside him stirred, not in words, but in something primal. That afternoon, while Mason was reviewing the maps, Asher quietly slipped away to the back of the house. At first, Harper paid no attention, but when she noticed him repeatedly scratching at the wooden floor beside the old storage shed, the place Logan once used to keep combat gear, she called Mason to take a look. They opened the heavy wooden door. A wave of musty air poured out, laced with the scent of rust and dried sweat. Inside was a small room, packed with old wooden crates, armor, leads, and moldy backpacks, scattered traces of memory, as if time itself had avoided stepping in. Asher led them directly to a corner. There, under a dusty tarp, was a locked metal case. Harper knelt. The lock was rusted but easy to break. She opened it using Logan's old combat knife, and the motion felt like forcing open the past. Inside was an old, bulky radio recorder. A magnetic tape still sat in the slot, unplayed. There were signs it had been removed and reinserted, as if Logan knew someday someone would need to hear it. "This was the equipment Logan used on some of his final missions," Mason said, his voice lowering. "I thought it had been confiscated. Turns out, he hid it." They brought the device inside. Harper sat at the table, fingers trembling as she pressed play. After a hiss of static, a muffled voice came through. Logan's voice, unclear, but unmistakable. "No confirmation received from command. Our team is outside the permitted zone. Resupply orders cut. This is no longer a search mission. This is abandonment. If anyone finds this recording, don't let it be erased." Harper broke down in tears. Mason clenched his fists. He turned to Asher, and it was the dog who reacted most clearly. Asher stood abruptly, let out a short whine, then stepped back, sat down, and lowered his head. As if hearing the voice of the one who was gone, and understanding, Logan had not only left behind evidence, he had left behind part of himself, living inside Asher. Harper sank down onto the wooden floor beside him. She wrapped her arms around him. for the first time, fully. Asher didn't move away. He closed his eyes and exhaled, a deep, heavy breath, as if carrying the weight of truth itself. In that moment, Harper understood. Asher was not just a witness, not just a companion. He was a guardian, the last piece of Logan, the soul leading her to what her brother had left behind. The mission was no longer an investigation. It was the completion of a promise never spoken aloud, but still alive in the eyes of a dog that guarded grief like a sentry. After the recording played, everything changed. Harper could feel it. Something had shifted. Not in the documents, but out there, in a world she couldn't see or control. The air thickened with tension, clinging to her skin and breath. Silence no longer felt peaceful. It became a hum, a low, waiting growl hidden in every gust of wind. She began to feel watched. Every step she took in the cabin seemed to echo beyond the walls, listened to, recorded by someone out there. It began the moment the tape played. The strange phone call started soon after. At first, it was just blocked numbers. Nothing on the other end. Silence. Then a man's voice, low and unfamiliar, whispered in the night, "You're digging too deep," and hung up before she could respond. Once, then again, and again, until it became a ritual of intimidation. On the third night, a black SUV appeared, parked quietly outside Mason's cabin. No headlights, no engine sound, just a mass of steel in the darkness, watching. By the time they went out to check, it had vanished, not a single tire mark left behind. Mason immediately locked the cabin into secure mode. The windows were reinforced with carbon mesh. Phones were stripped of SIM cards. All communications switched to encrypted military frequencies. He divided the data into 3 encrypted drives, hiding them in 3 different locations throughout the house, one beneath the windowsill, one in a dog food container, and one inside a broken flashlight in the basement. "They know we're holding something," Mason said, eyes fixed on the signal monitor. "And they don't just want to stop us from speaking, they want to erase everything." Asher changed too. Asher no longer slept deeply like before. Each night, he lay by the window facing the forest, ears standing tall. There were times Harper watched him remain completely still for 3 hours, as if he were listening to a rhythm only he could hear. Once, Mason called his name 3 times before Asher reacted. And when he did, his eyes looked darker, deeper, as if they no longer belonged to this place, but to a distant trench 1,000 miles away. One night, Harper came downstairs for water and found Asher growling softly, his eyes fixed on a shadow beyond the tree line. When she approached, he backed toward her, positioning himself between her and the glass door, signaling that something was waiting out there. Harper placed a hand gently on Asher's head, and she understood. He was no longer the same dog who had once lain still atop Logan's casket. Now, Asher had returned to the role of a soldier, and this time, the battlefield was her home. Then it happened. That night, Montana fell into a silence unlike any other. Not the usual stillness of the forest, not the wind threading through pine branches, not the soft hum of insects composing their midnight lullaby. Number. This was silence sharpened to the point of fear. The fog was heavy, draped like an invisible curtain around each tree limb, sliding through old pathways like a memory returning. The beam from Harper's headlights cut through the forest like a blade, slicing into the darkness, revealing broken branches and strange, twisted silhouettes, before sweeping past and leaving them swallowed again by shadow. There were no sounds. No birds, no wind, only the cold. And Harper's heartbeat, out of rhythm. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel as she turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin. Her pulse quickened. not from speed, but from an instinct she could not name. A creeping unease coiled up her spine like a blind snake, sliding over each vertebra. Her intuition needed no logic. Logan had once told her, when the silence is too perfect, it's no longer silence. It's a trap. Harper turned off the engine. The last light went out. Everything before her, the gravel road, the small wooden fence, the old maple tree on the left, looked exactly the same. But something was wrong. Deeply wrong. She stepped out of the car, slinging the backpack that carried the documents and memory card over one shoulder, the other hand gripping a half-finished cup of hot coffee from the local library. The steam curled upward, but could not push back the fog now coiling around her ankles like cold fingers. Crossing the damp grass, she passed a patch of wildflowers that had just started to bloom, the only fresh thing in this heavy night. But she didn't stop to admire them, as she usually would. Her eyes scanned the space around her, the swaying leaves, the tree shadows stretch over the porch steps. None of it felt right. The cabin stood there like a ghost. No lights, no sound. Not even the familiar tapping of Asher's claws on the wooden floor. The soft, rhythmic clack that always greeted her return. Silence, as if the house had been drained of life. Harper frowned. She stepped to the front door and tested the handle. Locked. Good. Still uneasy, she walked around to the back, to where Asher usually kept watch each night, where the shadows of the trees reached the kitchen window, normally just the play of foliage, but tonight they looked like outstretched hands in a dream. She stopped. The wind chime, the little bell beneath the porch eaves, wasn't moving. Even though the wind slipped past her shoulders and teased strands of her hair. It remained still. She looked down at the back door. It was ajar, just a crack, but enough for light from the yard to slip inside. And what made her shiver wasn't that it was open. It was that she didn't remember leaving it that way. Harper stepped back. The chill no longer came from the air, but from the deepest corner of her instinct. Then she heard a sound. Not leaves, not wind. Breathing. Close. Very close. Harper moved slowly along the rear porch. Mist brushed her cheek like a cold hand. The air was thick, silent enough that she could hear her own heartbeat. She scanned the trees, and for a moment it felt like even the leaves were holding their breath with her. A faint rustle, barely audible. Could have been the wind. Could have been something else. Then, it happened. A shadow burst from the bushes to her right, fast as an arrow loosed from a bow that had been drawn all night. Harper saw only a flash of motion, low, strong, and then the ground vanished beneath her. She was slammed down. Her body hit the damp soil hard, her back jolted with pain, mud splattered her face and hair. No time to scream. A hand clamped over her mouth, reeking of sweat and rusted metal. Her neck was pinned to the ground. The other hand reached for something. Cold, thin, sharp. A knife. "Don't move," his voice hissed through clenched teeth, rough, dry, still full of command. "Give me the memory card. Now." Harper couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded in her chest like it was trying to break through her ribs to escape. Her hands searched blindly for a rock, a stick, anything to fight back, but there was only cold soil and crumbling leaves. The blade pressed against her throat, ice cold, so close she could feel its trembling edge tighten with each squeeze of his hand. The memory card. It was in the backpack, right next to her. If he found it, it would all be over. And Logan would be buried again, for good. Part of her wanted to scream, to thrash, to kick him off, but fear froze her. Her muscles wouldn't move. Her fingers twitched weakly. Pain stung. The knife had nicked her skin. Blood welled up, drop by drop. She was going to die. Here, in the dark, alone. And then she saw Logan's face, not clearly but his eyes, staring through her from behind Asher's gaze. No words, no tears, just one thought rising in her mind. If you fall, let it be for the truth. The moment that thought formed, Asher arrived. No bark, no warning paw steps, just a gray blur cutting through the night like sharpened wind. No one saw where he came from. Only that he streaked across the yard like he had been fired from a gun. 4 legs fully extended, back low, ears pointed like twin spears, and his eyes. They were no longer a dog's eyes. They were the eyes of a warrior. A growl exploded, low, sharp, tearing the already tense air in two. The man turned, but too late. Asher struck, all his weight packed into a single lunge. He sprang at shoulder height, jaws wide, and sank his teeth into the wrist holding the knife. The blade clattered to the cold ground, like the sound of a final bell. The man screamed, a raw, throat-tearing scream of shock and pain. Harper scrambled back, covered in mud, her clothes torn, but her mind was clearing fast. Before her unfolded a primal fight for survival, with no room for words. Asher did not let go. The man thrashed, punched, swung wildly. One fist landed on Asher's side. A whimper escaped him, but he held firm. A second hit, gripping Asher by the scruff, trying to tear him off. Still, no release. The man dragged him across the yard, but Asher's jaws remained locked around his arm, claws scraping earth, anchoring himself like a root in a storm. Blood now poured from the bite. Fast. Warm. The man shrieked, drew a second knife from his hip, but before he could lift it, Asher twisted, shifted his weight, and bit deep into the man's shoulder. A crisp snap rang out, bone-breaking, another scream. The man's hand went limp. The blade dropped. His whole body sagged. Asher leapt back, eyes never leaving the target. Blood soaked his muzzle. His back was torn, bleeding, but he stood tall, steady. 1 second. 2. Then the man turned and ran, not daring to look back. Harper shot upright, her voice hoarse. "Asher!" She didn't need to call twice. He was already chasing. A gray missile loosed into the dark. She stood there, chest heaving, wrists trembling, sweat and blood mixing down her arms. She listened, for wind, for leaves, for her own breath, and then nothing. 1 minute, 2. Silence. Then Asher emerged from the mist. He wasn't dragging the attacker. He didn't need to. His belly was streaked with blood. A deep gash marked his left shoulder, his coat soaked, his hind leg lifted slightly, maybe dislocated or bruised. But his stride was steady, his eyes still sharp as blades. Asher approached, stopped in front of Harper. He didn't look back toward the woods. He looked at her. "You're alive. It's not over." No words, no whimper. Asher simply stood, like a statue carved from loyalty, pain, and an unbroken faith. And in that moment, Harper understood. This night wasn't an event. It was the beginning. And Asher, he was the last member Logan had left behind, burning bright in the dark. It had started with a growl, low and distant, somewhere deep in the night, not loud enough to alert the intruder, but enough to snap Harper awake in a storm of mud and blood pooling at her throat. That growl wasn't a normal dog's voice. It sounded like metal dragging against stone. A warning, a summons, a whisper from the edge of the world, heard only by those who guard the gates. Then, from behind the house, a gray figure burst forward. No warning, fast, low, precise. Asher. He didn't run. He launched forward like a living spear. No sound. No warning. He didn't need to see the target. He was the weapon. It all happened in a second. But for Harper, it felt like the world had flipped inside out. The gray blur tore across the grass, cutting through the dark, slicing through the beam of light from the back of the house, a silver streak ripping the air apart. The sound of teeth hitting flesh was like a heartbeat snapping in half. A dry thud, and the clatter of metal on stone rang out like a hammer sealing a coffin. The knife fell. The attacker screamed. Harper looked up, just in time to see Asher's eyes blaze like twin lanterns in a storm. No hesitation. No retreat. He had sunk his teeth into the wrist holding the blade, and he didn't let go. The man thrashed violently. His free hand punched Asher's head. Once. Twice. But Asher didn't whimper, didn't back down. His body dragged across the ground, shoulder slamming into a wooden post. Blood trickled from the corner of his eye. Still, his jaw locked tight. Asher's claws tore through the soil as if he were gripping the very edge between life and death. The man's blood sprayed across Asher's muzzle, neck, and back, but the dog didn't withdraw. Every clench of his teeth sank deeper, crushing the threat that dared touch Harper. In the dim light, Harper saw Asher's ears droop slightly, but his eyes never wavered. He wasn't looking at the attacker. He was looking at her. "I'm here. I've arrived. You're not finished yet." And as Harper finally pulled herself from the mud, her bloodied hands digging through dirt and debris, she felt herself emerge from a nightmare. Her senses returned. Her heart beat to life again. Asher had reignited her instinct to survive. The attacker kept fighting. He kicked toward Asher's ribs. One landed. Asher faltered, then let out a growl, low, drawn, thunderous. Not a whimper. A declaration. The man staggered back, pale, eyes wide with panic. He tried to yank his arm free, but Asher shifted, bit higher toward his shoulder. His teeth drove in like nails into wood. The man shrieked, grabbed Asher's fur, pounded his fists down. But every blow landed like fists on a steel door with no hinges. Asher didn't let go. And Harper, through ragged breath, saw something strange. Asher wasn't fighting with teeth. He was fighting with memory, with everything Logan had left behind. And with each surge of muscle, each scorched breath, Asher roared in place of Logan. "I'm still here! I'm still protecting!" The attacker gave one last heave, then collapsed, stumbling away. Blood streamed down his arm. The knife was gone. His will was gone. He turned and fled. Asher didn't hesitate. He gave chase, not with rage, but with duty. A soldier does not stop until the mission is complete. Harper sat upright, shouting instinctively, "Asher!" But he had already vanished into the woods, like a shadow sent by a soul no longer among the living. 1 minute. 2. Harper could only hear her own breath, and the soft drip of blood from her neck to the earth. Then Asher returned. He wasn't dragging the attacker. He didn't need to. Blood covered his coat. His muzzle was scratched. A long gash ran across his neck. But he walked upright, each step grounded and sure. Harper couldn't speak. Asher approached, stopped before her. He didn't pant, didn't collapse. He just looked at her. "You're alive. I'm alive. The mission isn't over." And in those deep, unwavering eyes, Harper no longer saw the dog from Logan's funeral. She saw the soldier Logan left behind. Asher emerged from the fog like a memory stretched into reality. No longer a normal dog, but a figure forged of blood, mud, and silent loyalty. His coat was stained, with the attacker's blood, and his own. The wound on his shoulder still bled, dark drops falling onto the grass like sharp notes in a symphony of a night never to be forgotten. Asher walked slowly, his right hind leg lifted unevenly. Harper noticed it might be dislocated or at least bruised, but his gaze was steady, his posture unbroken, and those eyes, cold, clear, alive. It was as if Asher had stepped out of a battlefield in Syria, not from the woods behind the house. When Harper looked up, her body still trembling, she saw him standing there, just a few steps away. No barking, no whining, no need to be called. Asher simply stood in front of her, like a wall, like a soldier. He no longer looked back at the forest. He looked only at her, with eyes that said everything. You're alive. I'm alive. What needed to be protected has been kept safe. Harper couldn't hold on anymore. Her legs gave out, like all the adrenaline in her body had dissolved the moment the attacker vanished. She collapsed, fell to her knees in the wet earth, blood-soaked grass, mist curling into her hair. And she embraced Asher. She didn't know how she did it, only that her arms wrapped around his neck, where his fur was still matted with blood and dirt. The smell of iron rose, warm and sharp, tightening her throat. Harper buried her face in that blood-soaked coat, and she wept. Not a soft cry, not beautiful tears like in the movies, but the sobbing of someone who had just brushed against the edge between loss and survival. The cry of a soul pulled back from the brink. She had thought she wouldn't make it. She had thought she would die without ever finishing the truth for Logan. But Asher, the final warrior, had returned. She didn't know how long she cried, only that her tears soaked Asher's back, mixing with blood, and each strand of fur at his neck trembled, as if that small heart was shaking in rhythm with her sobs. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Fast. Urgent. Leaves cracking beneath boots. Harper jolted. Asher let out a low growl, not of threat, but of caution. A figure emerged from behind the maple tree. Mason, gun in hand, eyes scanning the yard, sweat beading across his forehead despite the cold. He ran toward them, breath short, boots covered in mud. The chest-mounted flashlight still blinked in slow pulses. He stopped when he saw Harper and Asher, one on her knees, one standing guard, both streaked with blood. The sight froze him. He had heard Asher's growl through the collar's personal locator. It wasn't the training signal. It was the sound of real combat. He had run without thinking, terrified he would be too late, but he wasn't. They were still there. Whole. Bleeding, but unbroken. Mason moved closer, lowering the gun. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice nearly breaking. Harper didn't answer. She only gave a small nod, then turned to Asher, as if to say, it was him. Mason knelt, setting the gun aside, facing Asher. And for the first time in years he saw that look again, the look of a silent comrade. A look he once saw in another dog, one that had dragged him from an explosion zone, a dog that hadn't survived. Asher returned the stare. No blinking, no lifting his head. Just standing still, like a monument. Mason reached out, very slowly, and gently touched Asher's head. No pats, no rough strokes, just one careful motion carrying everything he could not put into words. "I thought I'd seen it all on the battlefield," Mason said, eyes never leaving Asher. "But nothing like what I just witnessed." 3 figures, a soldier, a girl, a warrior carrying memory. They stood there, in the dead of night, on soil soaked in blood and crushed grass. No one said another word, because none were needed, only a single glance. And it was enough to know. From here on, there was no turning back. Harper stood. Her hands still trembled, but her eyes were different. She didn't look at Mason. She looked at Asher. And in that moment, she no longer saw her brother's dog, not the loyal creature who had once curled on a coffin in the middle of a church. She saw the living symbol of Logan, the last comrade still standing. A soul of instinct, memory, and unwavering trust carried on 4 legs and a heart that had never betrayed. She placed a hand on Asher's head and whispered, her voice breaking, "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for never leaving my brother." Asher tilted his head slightly, as if he understood. No bark, no sound, just one step back, then he turned to stand between Harper and Mason, shielding from the wind, shielding from the night, shielding from the fear that still lingered. That night, no one slept. The blood was washed off. The wounds were bandaged for now, but what remained in their hearts could not be scrubbed clean. Mason sat on the porch, his rifle beside him. Harper sat nearby, eyes fixed on the forest. Asher lay at the threshold, head resting between the two of them, ears still alert, eyes open, chest rising and falling with every deep breath. No one spoke about what had happened, because they all understood. The most terrifying part wasn't the attack itself. It was what might come after. Mason knelt once more. This time not to check a wound, not because of fatigue, but out of respect. He looked up at Asher, into the eyes of a dog who had seen battle, who had survived, who had quietly disappeared from official reports. But never before had he seen eyes like these. It wasn't just a gaze. It was a living memory, the burden of a warrior, not needing rank, not needing medals, but carrying out the mission to the very end. He placed his hand on Asher's head, palm stained with blood, warm, real, no longer a legend. And he whispered, voice hoarse, "I used to think I'd seen everything there was to see on a battlefield, but nothing is like what I witnessed tonight. Nothing is like you." Asher didn't move. He stood still, ears lowered slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the release of a weight carried far too long. Beside them, Harper watched quietly. In her eyes now there was no simple gratitude, no sentiment of owner and dog. There was recognition. She no longer saw Asher as what survived Logan, not a pet, not a companion, but a part of Logan himself, a piece of the truth, a soldier, of flesh and blood, of instinct, and a heart that had never betrayed. In him, she saw everything Logan had ever believed in: loyalty, the will to survive, and a silence heavy with things left unsaid. In his proud stance, she saw that Logan had never truly left. The night mist thickened. The world around them was completely still, but it no longer felt threatening, because in that silence, the truth was beginning to take shape. Mason stood, eyes heavy. He looked at Harper, then at Asher. A triangle of trust had just been forged, not through words, but through blood. And he spoke, slowly, almost as a declaration. This night wasn't just an attack, it was a warning, a signal from a war that never really ended. From this moment on, there's no turning back. Asher raised his head, ears lifted, eyes steady, ready. 2 days after the attack, the small wooden cabin in the mountains of Montana was no longer just a place of refuge. It had become the center of a covert investigation. Inside, the warm light of a desk lamp fell over scattered papers, maps, troop movement diagrams, encrypted journals, and a laptop with a waveform analysis on screen. The soft clicks of a mouse echoed steadily, mingling with distorted audio recordings. No longer ignored. Logan, in the final recording decrypted by Harper and Mason, didn't raise his voice. But every word was a ticking bomb. I was reassigned last minute. No prior notice. The operation code doesn't match. The radio frequencies were blocked internally. I suspect the new route is a trap. If someone hears this recording, check the S13 grid on September 14th. I don't know if anyone still believes me, but don't let my unit die in vain. If I don't come back, don't let silence be the only thing that remains. Logan's voice was raspy. Between the static were strange signal noises, not standard to military communications. Mason squinted, adjusting the noise filters. "Listen to this part," he said. He played the clip. "Team redirected under command 07 Delta. Operation time 03:15. No contact, no response signal." Harper turned to Mason. "Is 7 Delta listed in the command registry?" she asked. Mason said nothing. His face began to change. "Number, my team has never received an order from that source, and this—" He turned the laptop screen to face her, showing a decoded internal military map. "This is the actual deployment chart, following standard protocols. And this—" He clicked. A new overlay appeared. Same timing, different route. S13 corridor, exposed path, no forest cover. That's where Logan's unit was ambushed. Harper clenched her fists. The fire in her eyes wasn't anger. It was the heat of confirmation. "Did anyone sign off on the route change?" Mason shook his head. "No one will admit to it, but the data shows a command-level breach inside the tactical operations system. Someone sold the route to the enemy." A long silence followed. Only the wind whistled through the window frame. Asher was lying at Harper's feet. His ears twitched slightly with each segment of the audio. When the final recording played, he let out a soft whimper, low and short, as if he had just recognized something familiar. Mason looked down at him. He reacted to this part. Harper looked surprised. "Why?" Mason was silent for a few seconds. Maybe because he was there. Logan might have let Asher hear this order before they deployed, and Asher's memory, his audio memory, still holds it. The next day, they brought Asher to the Tactical Audio Lab at a veteran research center partnered with the military. There, special equipment was attached to his ears and neural response points to detect frequency-triggered reactions. When the 07 Delta recording was played again, Asher reacted immediately. Heart rate increased. Slight contraction in the eye muscles. Twitching eyelids. Ears up. Jaw clenched. When the segment reached Logan's line, "No communication response," Asher growled, softly, but just enough to register as a psychological stress response in the system. Mason nodded. "It's not only humans who remember. Asher didn't just carry Logan's life. He carried the memory of the command that cost him everything." Harper compiled everything. The original and altered operational maps, the recording of Logan's voice, the handwritten journal from the box buried under the apple tree, the audio trigger response from Asher's test, SIM card extraction data linked to anonymous threat calls, GPS logs matching the attack's timeline from archived data, a complete file. She sent it to the Pentagon, not through a lower channel, but directly, calling one of Logan's old friends, Lieutenant Colonel Barrett, who had once served with him in Afghanistan. "Everything is in here," Harper said, her voice strangely calm. "It will burn through an entire wall of silence, and I'm ready." Barrett remained silent on the other end. Then he said, "You've gone farther than Logan ever dreamed. And you're not doing it alone." 7 days later, the case was entered into an internal investigation. 3 days after that, a senior officer from Logan's former unit, Major General Owen Kessler, was arrested. The charges: abuse of command authority to manipulate deployment orders, deliberate disruption of tactical communication during high-risk operations, aiding the enemy through illegal financial exchanges for classified route information. The military tribunal reopened the case that, for more than 2 years, had been quietly closed under the label the Logan Hale Incident. And this time, no one accused Logan of tactical misconduct. On the contrary, he was exonerated and finally called what he had always been, the man who died telling the truth. That morning, the Montana sky was unusually clear. After days of heavy fog and gray clouds draped across the mountains, the sky opened like a sign. Sunlight touched the land that had long hidden too many silences. But now, the truth was finding its rightful place. At 8 a.m. Washington time, a special news bulletin aired. The United States Department of Defense officially announces the findings of the investigation into Major Logan Hale, the Special Forces officer who died during the 2022 border operation. After a 17-day inquiry, and with additional evidence from internal and civilian sources, the Military Council has concluded that Logan Hale did not violate tactical orders. He died trying to expose the manipulation and internal leak of classified information from within command. Logan Hale is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and his name will be etched onto the National Memorial with the inscription, "A warrior who fell for speaking the truth." Harper sat still in front of the screen. In her hand was Logan's old dog tag. Rusted at the edges, the lettering faded. But now, its meaning burned brighter than any medal. She didn't cry. She didn't need to anymore, because her tears had become the blood of justice. Beside her, Asher lay silently, his head resting between his front paws. He wasn't looking at the screen, but his ears lifted slightly when he heard the name, Logan Hale. And Harper noticed it. Not reflex, response. 1 week later, the official memorial was held at Arlington National Cemetery. The flag that had once covered Logan's casket was folded a second time, the first at his funeral, this time as a symbol of recognition, not farewell. Harper stood in the front row. The dress uniform she had borrowed from Logan's former unit looked both strange and familiar on her, as if she were walking in his footsteps, wearing invisible boots. When the Pentagon's representative read his name, the sound stretched across the space. The wind swept over the grass-covered hill so gently that many could believe Logan's spirit was walking quietly among them. Then, when the granite plaque was unveiled, his name appeared clearly against the pale gray stone. Logan Michael Hale, 1985 to 2022. A warrior who fell for speaking the truth. Harper placed her hand on the inscription. It wasn't cold. It was warm, as if truth had a heartbeat. Asher stood beside her, untethered, no leash needed. He looked at the words, then turned his face toward the wind, as if listening for a familiar command echoing from far away. Harper whispered, "You've come home, Logan. You're no longer the one they blamed. You are the one who kept our conscience alive." That evening, the headlines were everywhere. But Harper didn't read a single article. It wasn't because she was cold or indifferent. It was because she had lived through every moment, in skin, in flesh, in the tears that fell onto Asher's back as he lay guarding Logan's grave through those days when no one else was watching. She didn't need more praise. But there was one event, a single moment, where she knew she had to be present. Because the one who deserved it had never once asked for anything. 3 days after Logan's memorial, the Special Tactical Command issued a decision unprecedented in military history. To hold the first ever honorary retirement ceremony for a K-9 warrior, Asher, recognized as an individual who fulfilled his duty to protect his comrade, safeguard classified information, and contribute to bringing the truth into the light. The ceremony was held at the very base where Logan had once served. No grand media coverage, no live broadcast, only those who were meant to be there. Mason, the comrade who survived; Harper, the sister who carried the family home; and Asher, the soldier who never left the front line. When Asher stepped onto the stage in the old training yard, the entire area fell completely silent. He wore his combat vest again, the one that had sat untouched in the gear room for over a year, now freshly cleaned and fitted. A small badge was pinned to his chest. Honorary K9 Warrior. Mason led Asher in from the left, Harper from the right. Two people, two worlds, walking in the same steady rhythm. And Asher, in the middle, was like the axis that held an entire era's memory in place. At the metal platform, a retired colonel, the man who had once trained Logan, stepped forward with the discharge certificate. He knelt to meet Asher eye to eye, saying nothing, just pinned the medal to the vest. Then whispered, "Thank you for completing the mission, to the very last moment." Asher didn't blink. He simply stood, posture perfect, like a soldier hearing his final command. When the photo was taken, it felt like the world held its breath. Mason stood tall. Harper rested her hand on Asher's shoulder, and Asher looked directly into the lens, not with eyes that said, "I have fought," but with the message, "I never gave up." That photo would later become the cover image for a military education campaign on PTSD and the silent sacrifices of service dogs. Asher's name was etched beside Logan's on the National K9 Memorial, along with the inscription, "Honorary K9 Warrior, keeper of a battlefield memory never officially recorded." And in the hearts of thousands, Asher became more than just a dog. He was the last to carry the memory of a warrior who had never returned home in the way he deserved. A fragment of Logan's soul left in a world far too accustomed to forgetting. A witness who could not lie. Harper didn't choose a cathedral or a public plaza for Asher's private farewell. She chose the apple tree behind the house, where Logan used to climb for fruit each summer, where the two of them had played code games and buried their imaginary treasures, and where she and Asher had once unearthed that tin box of truth. The tree still stood there that year, older, its trunk cracked, bark rough, roots rising above the soil, but steady, as if it had never left their childhood. Harper placed a small bronze statue at its base, simple, less than 5 feet tall. No military uniform, no weapons, just a smiling Logan, his hand resting gently on the head of a sitting dog beside him. And no name engraved in stone. Only one small line. Mission complete. Truth secured. That morning, Harper wore a white shirt and faded jeans. No insignia, no formalities, just herself, as she once was, simply Harper, Logan's sister, not the witness of an investigation. Mason stood quietly at a distance. He didn't step forward. He understood this was a moment shared between two souls, bonded through someone who was no longer there. And Asher, he walked forward on his own. No one called him. No one led him. He moved slowly, steadily, each step measured, as if a marching drum beat inside him. His fur had more silver now, after all the storms, but his eyes, they were still the eyes of a soldier who had never left the fight. Around his neck, loosely tied to an old sand-colored strap, was Logan's dog tag. The tag Harper once thought was lost. The one no one knew Asher had kept. Hidden all along, beneath his fur, behind his neck, close to his heart. Harper gasped when she saw it. She couldn't speak. Her hand rose to her lips, as if every word of gratitude had broken before it could be spoken. Asher stepped closer to the statue. No bark, No sound. He stopped, then bowed his head, slowly, deeply, like a ritual only a warrior would understand, and gently he let go of the tag. It dropped. Clink, landing neatly at the feet of Logan's statue. No one picked it up. No one touched it. Because they all understood. It was not just a token. It was a passing of the torch from a soldier to a legend. Asher stood tall, turned away, walked back across the grass. He didn't look back. Not out of indifference, but because the ceremony was complete. The mission had come full circle. Harper watched him go. She didn't cry, but her heart cracked open like a spring finally breaking through stone. She whispered, as if only the wind could hear. "We haven't lost you. You're just somewhere else now, standing guard in your own way." There was no reply. Only the final leaf of the season fell from the apple tree, spiraling gently down beside the old dog tag. A quiet, sacred farewell. Harper stood there a little longer. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply felt peace. The kind of peace that comes when a flame inside no longer roars, but burns steady, just enough to illuminate, to remember, and to keep walking forward. Asher remained a few paces away. He turned to look at her. No voice needed, no command required. Just his gaze. Deep, calm, and grounded like the earth itself. Harper nodded. Then the two of them, woman and dog, turned and walked away from the ceremony. They passed through patches of afternoon sunlight scattered on the grass, through shadows cast by trees, stretched like memories fading behind them. Neither looked back. There was no need, because everything worth holding on to had been left beneath the apple tree, and everything worth carrying was walking beside her. Every journey must end, but some journeys, even when they finish, leave behind a trail of light that never fades. A light shaped like a soldier who fell for the truth, a dog who fought to the last breath, a woman who refused to let silence be the final word. And as their silhouettes grew smaller in the golden hour, only the wind whispered through the apple branches, softly, clearly, like a final promise echoing from far away. "I'm still here, just guarding things in my own way." Asher never spoke, but he told the story of an entire war, of a great loss, and a truth long buried, simply by standing beside pain, by holding his ground, and by never asking to be honored. The story of Logan, Harper, and Asher was not just a song of loyalty and courage. It was a quiet reminder that even the voiceless carry on their backs memories, wounds, and duties we humans often forget. We survive war, survive loss, not only because of those who speak, but because of those who silently stand in the crossfire to protect what we love. And when we look into the eyes of a dog who once stood at the front lines, we don't just see an animal. We see a soul who once guarded the last bit of humanity in this world. Love an animal as if it were the hand of someone you're not yet ready to say goodbye to.